man. Get this rubbish off my road.
Baba Rotimi barely had time to raise his hands before the woman grabbed the edge of his cooler box and shoved it hard against the curb. The lid burst open. Ice cream and melted syrup spilled across the hot tarmac in thick, colorful streams. A full day's stock, gone in seconds. This is what happens, she snapped, stepping over the mess in her heels, not even looking down at it. When people like you refuse to stay out of the way of people like me. Baba Rotimi said nothing. He simply looked at what was left of his afternoon's work, his hands very still at his sides. She didn't wait for a response. She turned, climbed back into her silver Range Rover, and pulled away without a backward glance, leaving him standing in a spreading puddle of melted ice cream while a dozen phones recorded from nearby windows. He knelt down slowly, started cleaning up what little could be saved. He had no idea, kneeling there in the heat, that in a few hours, that same woman would be sitting across a boardroom table from the two most important people in his life. It had started, as these things often do, with traffic. Lagos go-slow that afternoon stretched from Mozambique all the way past the bridge, horns layered on horns, the sun sitting heavy over everything. Baba Rotimi had been riding along the shoulder carefully, his cooler box rattling gently with each bump, calling out his usual song to the children he could see through car windows. Ice cream. Cold, cold ice cream. A silver Range Rover had inched up behind him, engine growling with impatience. The woman behind the wheel was already 40 minutes late for the most important meeting of her career, and she was not in a mood to notice an old man on a bicycle. Her phone had rung twice in the last 10 minutes, her assistant's name flashing both times. She'd snapped at him on the second call, loud enough that a driver in the next lane glanced over. I know what time it is, Emeka. I am in the traffic. Tell them I'm coming. No. Don't tell them I'm running late. Tell them there's an accident on the bridge. Tell them anything. She'd thrown the phone onto the passenger seat without waiting for a reply, both hands gripping the wheel, watching the minutes climb on the dashboard clock like a slow, personal insult. She was not, in the ordinary run of her days, a cruel woman. She was a tired one, that morning, stretched thin by 6 weeks of preparation, riding on the next 40 minutes, and tired people reach for whoever is nearest when they finally run out of patience. The old man on the bicycle happened to be nearest. She'd leaned on her horn. Baba Rotimi glanced back, lifted a hand in apology, and edged as far right as the road allowed. It wasn't enough. The horn came again, longer this time, and then the driver's door had swung open. She'd stepped out in heels that weren't made for standing on hot asphalt, designer sunglasses pushed up into her hair, phone still in one hand. Old man, move your bicycle. Her voice cut through the noise of the traffic. Do you know how long I've been sitting behind you? I am sorry, madam, Baba Rotimi said, already trying to walk his bicycle further toward the gutter. The road is small here. I am trying. Trying isn't good enough. She looked him up and down. The faded shirt, the worn sandals, the paint peeling slightly off the front of his cooler box. People like you shouldn't even be on this road with real cars. This is not a village path. A few heads turned in nearby vehicles. Somebody's phone came up, recording. Baba Rotimi kept his voice level, the way he always did. I am only trying to sell small, madam. I will move. That was when she reached the cart. What spilled onto that road wasn't much by the standards of the woman who'd caused it. A few thousand naira in melted stock. Nothing that would register on a balance sheet built for contracts worth millions. But it was more than half of what Baba Rotimi expected to earn that entire day, gone in the time it took a cooler lid to bounce twice against the tarmac. It meant a shorter trip to the market that evening. It meant telling the woman who sold him a sachet water on credit that he'd settle up on Thursday instead of today. Small arithmetic. The kind only people with very little ever have to do out loud in their own heads, standing over a ruined afternoon on a hot road. To understand why that mattered so much, you have to understand who Baba Rotimi actually was. He was 68 years old, and if you'd asked anyone who actually knew him, they would have told you he was one of the happiest men in the neighborhood. Not because his life was easy, but because he'd built it to be exactly the size he wanted. He hadn't always sold ice cream. He'd worked for decades in construction, Raised two daughters mostly on his own after his wife passed when the girls were young, and watched, with a pride that never once curdled into vanity, as both of them grew into women who built something far bigger than he ever had. His daughters, Folake and Temelade, were twins, 34 years old, and among the wealthiest businesswomen in Lagos. Isle Holdings, the company they built together from a single real estate deal a decade earlier, now stretched across property development, logistics, and a growing tech portfolio. They had offered their father more times than either of them could count, enough money to retire into any life he wanted. A driver, a proper house on the island, staff to do everything for him. He always said the same thing: "I like my bicycle." He genuinely did. Just that same morning, hours before the Range Rover ever found him, a small girl named Blessing had come running out her family's compound the second she heard his bell, two crumpled Naira notes clutched in her fist. Counted twice on the walk over the way she always did. "Baba, wait for me." "I always wait for you," he told her. The same thing he told her most mornings, crouching slightly to hand over a cone before she'd even finished catching her breath. "Small girl, one day you'll be too fast for even my bicycle." She'd giggled, taken her ice cream, and run straight back to show her older brother, who never had money of his own but always got the last melting bite anyway, because Baba Rotimi had learned a long time ago to make the scoops a little generous for the children who shared. He liked knowing every face on his usual route that way. The market woman who always bought two on credit until Friday, the primary school gate where he sold out fastest on hot days. His daughters had built an empire. He had built a small, warm corner of the world where people were simply glad to see him coming. That afternoon, standing over a ruined cooler box hours later, none of that made the moment sting any less. So he cleaned what he could, salvaged two unbroken tubs from the bottom of the cooler, and walked his bicycle the rest of the way rather than ride it, his hands still faintly sticky. He hadn't planned to go to the office. He rarely did during work hours. Didn't want to be underfoot. Didn't want anyone thinking their father needed checking on. But something about the afternoon had left him wanting, just for a few minutes, to see his daughters' faces. Isle Holdings occupied 11 floors of a glass building on Victoria Island, with security guards at the gate and a lobby that gleamed like something out of a magazine. Baba Rotimi walked in wearing his faded shirt and sandals, cooler box left locked outside with the gateman, and the security staff at the front desk lit up the second they saw him. "Baba, good afternoon, sir." One of them was already coming around the desk. "You want water? Should I call upstairs?" "No, Walla," he said, waving him off gently. "I just want to see my girls small. He'd never once been made to feel like his simple clothes didn't belong in that lobby. His daughters had made sure that, years ago, in a quiet conversation with the whole staff that nobody ever needed repeating. He didn't know, walking toward the elevator, that upstairs, at that very moment, his daughters were sitting across the table from the very woman who had just spilled his afternoon across a Lagos road. Folake and Temelade sat across from each other at the boardroom table. The proposal spread open between them. "She's late," Temelade said, checking her watch for the third time, not bothering to hide her mild irritation. 40 minutes late, Folake said, not looking up from the figures in front of her. "But her numbers are the best we've seen this quarter. I can forgive 40 minutes for numbers like this. You forgive everything for good numbers." "Not everything." Folake finally looked up, the ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "Just most things." Temelade laughed, closing her own folder. "Daddy would say character matters more than numbers." "Daddy also gives free ice cream to children who don't have coins," Folake said. "We can't run a company on his accounting." They were still half laughing about it when the receptionist buzzed through. Their guest had arrived, running slightly behind, very apologetic. Amaka Ease had spent 6 weeks preparing for this meeting. Her construction firm needed the partnership badly, a joint infrastructure contract that would double her company's standing in the industry practically overnight. She'd rehearsed her pitch in the mirror at home for 3 nights running. She'd worn her sharpest suit. She'd told herself, sitting in traffic that morning, that nothing was going to throw her off her game today. The incident with the old man on the bicycle had already slipped mostly out of her mind by the time she reached the Isle Holdings lobby, filed away under unfortunate delay, rather than anything she needed to think about twice. She stopped in front of the mirrored wall beside the elevator bank, checking herself the way she always did before a big meeting, smoothing her jacket, adjusting the gold pin at her collar, tilting her chin slightly to catch the light. She looked, she decided, exactly like a woman who deserved to be in this building, composed, successful, nothing about the last hours showing on her face at all. She smiled once at her own reflection, satisfied, and stepped into the elevator. Folake and Temelade rose to greet her when she walked in, both warm, both professional, the small private joke about their father already tucked away behind polished smiles. "Your numbers are strong," Folake said once they'd all sat, flipping a page. "We're prepared to move forward, pending a few final details." Amaka allowed herself a small, private breath of relief. This was going better than she'd hoped. Whatever mess she left behind on the road that morning, it hadn't cost her anything that mattered. A few minutes, a bruised ego belonging to someone who'd never once crossed paths with her again. That was simply how mornings like this went, she told herself. You stepped over the small obstacles to get to the room that actually counted. The old man on the bicycle wasn't part of this world. He didn't need to be. Then the boardroom door opened. Baba Rotimi stepped in quietly, the way he always did, not wanting to interrupt, just wanted to wave hello before finding a seat in the waiting area. "Daddy." Temelade was already up, crossing the room to hug him. Folake followed a half-second later, both of them lighting up the way they always did when their father appeared unannounced. Amaka's polite, professional smile froze on her face. She recognized the shirt first, then the sandals, then with a slow, sinking certainty, the face. The old man from the road, the bicycle, the ruined ice cream, standing in the middle of the office of the two women she had spent 6 weeks trying to impress, being called daddy by both of them at once. Her stomach dropped somewhere around her shoes. "Are you all right?" Folake asked, noticing the shift in Amaka's expression. "Fine," Amaka managed. "Just surprised. I didn't realize you had company." "This isn't company," Temelade said, smiling, still holding her father's hand. "This is our father." Baba Rotimi glanced at Amaka then, and something in his eyes, recognition unmistakable, though not unkind, passed between them for just a moment before he looked away, not wanting to make a scene in his daughter's important meeting. Folake, sharp as ever, caught the look anyway. "Daddy," Folake said slowly, studying her father's hands, the faint sticky residue still clinging to his fingers, the small scrape on one knuckle he hadn't quite managed to clean. "What happened to you today?" "Nothing serious," Baba Rotimi said, waving a hand the way he always did when he didn't want to cause trouble. "Small accident with my cart. Nothing to worry about." "What kind of accident?" He hesitated. Amaka, across the table, felt every second of that hesitation land somewhere in her chest. "A woman was in a hurry," he said finally, gently, still not looking to assign blame out loud. "My cart fell. Some of my stock spoiled. It happens sometimes on a busy road." "Did she apologize?" Temelade asked. Baba Rotimi didn't answer right away, which was itself an answer. Both daughters turned, slowly, toward Amaka. "That was you?" Folake said. It wasn't a question. Amaka's carefully rehearsed pitch evaporated entirely from her mind. I didn't know," she started. "I didn't know he was your father. I was late. I was stressed about this meeting, and You knocked over an old man's cart and drove away," Temelade said, her voice even not raised, which somehow made it land harder than shouting would have. "Whether you knew whose father he was has nothing to do with whether that was right." "I know," Amaka said quietly. "It wasn't right. I was frustrated, and I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it. That's the truth. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. There were people recording." Folake said, "It's probably already online. Did that cross your mind before you drove off?" Amaka's face went a shade paler. "No," she admitted. "Honestly, no. I didn't think about any of it once I was back in the car. That's what scares me most. Saying it out loud right now." Baba Rotimi, still standing beside his daughter's chairs, spoke for the first time since the confession. "I don't need you to feel bad for my sake," he said, not unkindly. "I have sold ice cream for 11 years. I have seen worse days than today. But you should know, You didn't need to like my bicycle or my job or how I look on the road. You only needed to treat me like a person. Amaka looked at him for a long moment, and something in her face changed. Not performance this time. Something closer to actual shame. You're right, she said. I'm sorry. Genuinely. Not because of who you turned out to be. Because of what I did, full stop. The room was quiet for a moment. Amaka sat very still, aware that the contract she'd spent 6 weeks chasing was now hanging on something far less predictable than numbers on a page. We're not going to pretend this doesn't matter, Folake said finally. We built this company on the belief that how you treat people who can't do anything for you tells us more than any proposal ever could. That's not a slogan for us. It's how our father raised us. So the deal is off, Amaka said quietly, more statement than question. The deal is paused, Temelade corrected. Not because we want to punish you. Because we need to know if what just happened in this room, the apology, the honesty, was real, or if it was just the fastest way to save a contract. How would you know the difference? Amaka asked. Time, Folake said simply. We'll revisit this in a month. In the meantime, if you're serious about the apology, my father sells ice cream most afternoons near Falomo. You could start by learning his name properly. Amaka looked at Baba Rotimi. What is your name? Rotimi, he said, the ghost of a smile finally reaching his eyes. Not old man. Rotimi. Rotimi, Amaka repeated. I'll remember that. Her first visit to Falomo came 4 days after the boardroom confession, and it took her nearly 20 minutes of circling the block before she found the courage to actually stop the car. Baba Rotimi was mid-sale when she walked up, handing change to a teenage boy in a school uniform. He saw her coming, and didn't stop what he was doing, didn't make a show of it either way. Madam Amaka, he said, once the boy had gone. Not unkind, not warm either, just even the way he'd been in the boardroom. I wanted to buy ice cream, she said, feeling suddenly, foolishly formal standing in front of a bicycle cart in her work clothes. If that's all right. It is what I sell, he said, and there was the faintest suggestion of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Vanilla or the orange one? Whichever you recommend. The orange one is better, he said, but everybody says that about their own favorite. Choose vanilla if you're not sure yet. She chose vanilla. They didn't talk about the road or the meeting or the contract. For the entire 10 minutes she stood there, awkward, unsure what normal conversation with him was even supposed to sound like. She left with more questions than answers, and came back 4 days later anyway. The second visit went easier. The third, easier still. By then she learned the names of 2 of his regular child customers, and the story behind the small dent in his cooler box, a memory from an earlier, gentler accident years before Amaka had ever come along. You didn't have to keep coming, Baba Rotimi told on that third visit, handing over a cone to a small boy who paid in exact coins counted twice. I know, Amaka said, watching the boy run off toward his friends. I wanted to understand what I almost threw away over 40 minutes of traffic. Baba Rotimi considered that for a moment, wiping down the edge of his cooler with a rag. He kept for exactly that purpose. 40 minutes, he repeated. That is all it took. That's the part one keeps sitting with, Amaka admitted. Not that I did it, that it took so little to make me do it. He didn't offer her forgiveness that day. He didn't owe her that, and both of them seemed to understand it without needing to say so out loud. He simply nodded once and handed her a second scoop on the house, the way he did for the children who shared. When the month was up, Folake and Temelade called her back into the boardroom. This time, Baba Rotimi wasn't there. It wasn't his meeting to sit on, and everyone in the room understood that without needing to say it. We spoke to our father, Temelade said. He tells us you've been showing up, consistently, not performing for us. He made a point of saying nobody was watching those visits but him. I wasn't doing for the contract, Amaka said. I want to be honest about that. Somewhere around the second visit, it stopped being about the contract at all. Folake studied her for a long moment, then finally slid the proposal back across the table. Then let's talk business, she said. In the end, the partnership went through. Amaka's company grew, the way she'd hoped it would from the very beginning. But that wasn't the part of the story she found herself telling people months later when they asked how the deal had come together. She told him about a bicycle and a spilled cooler of ice cream and an old man who never once raised his voice at her, even when he had every reason to. She told him his name correctly every time. A year later, her own company hired its first driver-turned-manager off the street, a young man named Afani, who'd spent 3 years running deliveries on a rented motorcycle before Amaka noticed how carefully he handled every account he touched. Her operations director questioned promotion, gently, the way people question things they don't quite understand. He doesn't have the paper qualifications the others have, the director said. Neither did the most important lesson I ever learned, Amaka said. And it came from a man selling ice cream off a bicycle. Give Afani the file. Let's see what he does with it. Baba Rotimi kept riding his route, the bell on his handlebars announcing him the same way it always had. Children still running out to meet him, the ordinary, unhurried shape of a life he'd chosen on purpose, worth more to him than any office on the 11th floor of a glass building he was proud of but never once needed for himself. On slow afternoons, if the timing lined up, Amaka still stopped by Falomo for a vanilla cone, and the two of them would talk for a few minutes about nothing important. The weather, the traffic, Blessing's latest missing tooth, the easy, unhurried kind of conversation that only exists between people who no longer have anything left to prove to each other. His daughters never let him forget how proud they were of exactly that. If you were Amaka, standing in that boardroom and realizing exactly whose father you'd humiliated on the road that morning, would you have owned it the way she did, or looked for a way out? Tell me where you're watching from tonight, and tell me honestly, have you ever judged someone by what they looked like they had, instead of who they actually were? I'll be reading every comment.